Story 1. Back when I was a sophomore in high school, I used to be very close friends with this girl KK, and I met in middle school and were instantly clicked. We would hang out after school very frequently. K had a very turbulent childhood. Deceased father, foster care, substance abuse mom, and K's family would house up a lot. Or sophomore year, K's family was staying with their A's ex-husband. My parents never really stressed out about me hanging out with K because she was such a kind soul and a great influence on me. Now the man K was staying with was interesting to say the least. I remember the first incident that made me scratch my head was when we all went out to dinner with K and her family, and Richard tacked along. K and I were sat at the table with him, and he was venting to us about his dating life and showing us pictures of his Tinder bio and all the women he was chatting to. We both kind of laughed it off and engaged with him, but we didn't think much of it. Sometimes when Kay and I hung out, Richard would have us come to the basement, and he had this room with a drum kit, and he'd play them for us with the lights off. Anyways, the strangest encounter I personally had with him was when I went to Kay's house to hang out for the day, and she went to take a shower. While she was in the shower, I was sitting in her room, and Richard wandered in and told me he wanted to show me something cool in his room. Kay's room was on the first floor, and Richard's was the only room on the second floor. Being the naive girl I was, I agreed and followed him up the stairs. When we got to his room, he realized his room was locked and seemed very annoyed and jittery because his key was downstairs. Now, instead of going downstairs, Richard takes his credit card out of his wallet and tries to unlock the door that way. Thankfully, it didn't work, and something clicked in my brain, and I decided to go back downstairs and sit in the bathroom with Kay until she was done with her shower. I'm now 23, and looking back at it, I honestly don't think there was anything cool to show me in that room, and I thank the moon and the stars that he never got it unlocked. I never told Kay, but as we got older, I casually asked if she had any weird encounters with him, and she said no. I'm not really sure how to end this, but I'm thankful I never got to see what was beyond that door. My boyfriend Jan and I were staying with two of his friends, Jim and Jeremy. Story 2. Jeremy had left the apartment an hour or so before Jay, and I decided to go to bed. A few minutes after Jay fell asleep, I heard a knock on the door, and Jim answered. It turns out it was Jeremy, but he wasn't alone. Two guys that also lived in the apartment building forced Jeremy to knock at the door so that they could force their way in, as he didn't have his keys with him. Once they were inside, I could hear what sounded like a scuffle from where I was in the bedroom with the door closed. I woke Jay up, and all of a sudden we hear two unknown voices yelling, "Get down, get thee on the ground." Jay wanted to go see what was going on, but I begged him to stay in the bedroom with me, which he did. After what seemed like a couple of minutes of arguing and fighting sounds, everything went absolutely silent. We opened the bedroom door to see him laying on the ground with what we later found out to be a barbed machete sticking out of his chest. Jeremy was calling 911. The apartment building didn't have a buzzer to let anyone into the building, so when the police got there, Jay let them in and showed them to the suite we were in. After that, they separated us all and put the three of us into the back of 3 different police cars, where they left us while the paramedics tried to save Jim. Unfortunately, they weren't able to save him. He died at the apartment. I knew he was dead when the paramedics wheeled him out to the ambulance, but didn't leave for at least 5 minutes without working on him at all. The police took us to be questioned again, keeping us separated the entire time. About 12 hours later, they were ready to let us go, but told us we were not allowed to go back to the apartment, as it was an active crime scene. We were dropped off by the police at a coffee shop with no money, phones, wallets, or even shoes on our feet, as they wouldn't let us take anything from the apartment before they put us in the police cars. Before being questioned, we ended up going to a friend's house where we stayed until we were back into the apartment 4 or 5 days later. Once we were finally allowed back into the apartment, the first thing I had to do was clean up the blood, which I'm sure you can imagine was pretty hard to handle. It was pretty music. Story 3. Traumatic high. All I'm writing this here because it happened over a year ago now, and nothing has come of it since, but I wanted to write it down somewhere because I never really told anyone about it outside of some close friends. I live in a really small town, so I've never felt unsafe being alone or anything like that. I'm also 18 and female to male, so I feel a lot more comfortable in people not approaching me or being creepy since I passed well over the summer. I had started getting into the habit of going on walks as a way to get some exercise in and listen to a long podcast. I just Started the issue is I hate crossing streets and I feel like I'm being judged or watched by people in cars when I waited crosswalks. I'm a really paranoid person, so I started going on walks at night when less people were out, and since it was summer, it didn't get dark until around 9 p.m., so I'd usually walk from 10 p.m. to midnight. When I first started, I didn't have a solid walking path and would wander down random streets just for the fun of it until I looped back around and found my way home. But after about a month, I settled on a path that I'd usually loop twice to get 7 or 8 miles in. It took me across a few bridges and main streets, but mostly neighborhoods with minimal street lamps and a couple of parking lots. I used to avoid some busier streets. It was around maybe the 2-month mark I started feeling paranoid. Mind you, like I mentioned, I'm a paranoid guy. I always assume someone's watching me on the street, in the store, through a window. I think it comes from worrying people can look at me and somehow know I'm trans, but so when I started feeling like I was being watched on my night walks, I assumed the paranoia I usually feel finally caught up to my walks, and I just have to get used to it. But this time my paranoia was actually grounded when I started to notice what looked like the same guy almost every night walking my path at the same time, but always a street or two ahead of me because he was ahead of me and not behind. I sometimes felt like I was the creepy one following him, but I had been walking this path for a few months now, so I knew that wasn't the case obviously, but for a little while I was worried. This guy thought I was following him after maybe a week or two of me feeling like I was a total creep for walking my path. It blew up in my face in a pretty small way, but it caused me to feel totally freaked out. This night he was ahead of me as usual, but took a turn I don't take, so I lost him for a couple of streets. I didn't think much of it and continued on, but decided to divert from my own normal path and stop at a store to grab a drink. I don't do this too often because I had a habit of buying snacks I don't need, so I stopped going and hadn't at all in the last month after going in and wandering for a bit. So I didn't feel like I was wasting my walking time by not walking. I noticed that guy who I'd seen in the past last 2 weeks also in the store. I knew it was him because he always wore this puffy blue coat that seemed too heavy for the temperature, and one of those blue medical masks everyone bought in the bulk of 2020. I didn't think much of it other than, hey, there's that guy I've been following. That's funny. After wondering a bit more, I got my drink and left, having to take some darker streets I normally don't because of where the store was. I immediately noticed this guy's behind me and walking way too close for my liking because I distinctly remember not seeing him buy anything or even holding anything earlier. My paranoia is going crazy, so I start picking up the pace a bit and turning down my headphone volume because usually I have it on max, and when I do I hear he's calling out to me saying stuff like, "Wait up, little lady, and can't you just stop for a second?" I was so taken aback by being misgendered for the first time in forever that I did stop. I passed really well and rarely get mistaken for a woman. But at that time I was letting my hair grow out a bit, so I can now see how in the dark I could look like a girl. So now I'm standing there flabbergasted because I just got cold little lady when I'm neither of those things, and he kind of jogs on up to me and asks, "Why are you ignoring me?" I told him sorry, my headphones were loud, what do you want? And he immediately backs away because I have a deep-ass voice. My testosterone shots had blessed me with a voice deeper than most of my cis male friends, so it throws this guy off, and he's looking at me weird. Instead of responding, he mumbled something about thinking I was someone else and sorry about the mistake. Before walking off, it wasn't until the next day did I really sit down and connect the dots of what had happened and what had almost happened. I took a week break from my night walks, and when I started again, he was nowhere to be seen, and since I never saw his face and barely spoke to him, there was really nothing to report to anyone, so I just let it go. Story 4. When I was in middle school, I took the city bus to my school because my parents couldn't drive me and no school buses routed to my neighborhood. I didn't live in a particularly good place, but I never felt unsafe, probably because I was a kid and thought myself invincible. That morning I got on the bus to go to school, 6th grade at the time, so I was about 12, but let me tell you, I have always looked much younger than my age. It was decently crowded, so I go to my usual spot in the back. A few stops go by, and then a man gets on and sits right next to me. It's been about 10 years now, but I still remember how he looked: tall, thin, long, straight black hair. There was maybe 1 or 2 seats open, so it wasn't weird that he was next to me. At first I just figured he sat in the first seat he saw open. Then he started to talk to me. I can't remember what he said at first, but being early in the morning and already peeved that I had to share my space with him, I just made vague, disinterested noises at him. Then he asked where I was going. That's when my spidey senses started to tingle, because obviously it's early in the morning and I'm a child, so I'm going to school. So I said school in a duh kind of way. I realized now he was probably looking for me to tell him which school. A few stops went by and the bus opened up more, so I quickly went and found another empty seat. Not 5 minutes later he follows and sits next to me and still tries to get me to talk to him. He asks my name. I look to the front of the bus and see some 8th graders that I know from school and from riding this bus. My animal brain screams at me to find safety in the pack. I move up to the front of the bus and plant myself in the middle of them and basically press myself into them and give them the help me eyes. The guy moves again and sits directly in front of me. He asks my name again, and one of the boys I'm sitting with, G, quickly calls me by a fake name and turns his body so he's kind of shielding me and carries on a conversation with me until we get to our school. The group of 8th graders basically formed a circle around me and we huddled off the bus, and I turned to make sure the creep didn't follow us off the bus. Thankfully he didn't, but for the next few weeks I caught either the earlier or later bus in case he was on it again, and since the bus stop was right in front of my school I was afraid he knew where I went and would show up, but I never saw him again. So creep on the bus us. Let's not meet again. I'm so thankful those kids were there to help me. I don't know if that guy might have thought I was younger than I looked and thought I was young and stupid enough to trust him with more personal. Story 5. Information. I grew up in a small Southern California town known for its orange groves from days gone by. All those groves have been replaced by housing developments and shopping centers now, but there were still quite a few around. When I was growing up in the 90s, my friend Johnny and I used to get into all kinds of trouble. Back then we were just general miscreant, but there was one time I truly believe we almost became victims of a child predator. If anyone reading this also grew up in the 90s, you know that it was a different era. We'd be out all times of the day and our parents would have no idea where we were. There were lots of kidnappings back then. I can remember multiple times that I was offered candy or asked by some creep to help him find his cat. I always said I'd go check with my mom, and by the time she'd get outside ready to whoop some ass, he'd be gone. So anyway, Johnny and I were up to no good. One day after school we were trailing around this orange grove that bordered his street. We started pulling these little metal dam things off the irrigation channels and tossing them. WLY, all of a sudden we heard a sharp whistle and we both look up to see this man about 25 feet away from us, wagging his finger and going, but his reaction was not at all proportional to the property damage we were causing. He clearly didn't own or work in the GRO, because instead of screaming at us to stop, he had a grin from ear to ear. I can still see his face in my mind all these years later, and it gives me chills. Johnny and I stood there for a second watching this guy, then we looked at each other and Johnny looked back toward the guy and shouted, "Run!" I look over and the guy is in an all-out sprint towards us. Despite the physical exertion, he was ting into a sprint. The grin was still there. Johnny and I ran harder and faster than we ever had before. We made it out of the grove and back to his house before noticing the guy wasn't behind us anymore. We quickly forgot about it because Johnny's family had just gotten a Nintendo 64 and we started playing Mario. I can't remember if it was the next day or week, but sometime after this happened, we were with his mom getting donuts and we saw a wanted poster with a sketch of a man that looked awfully similar to the guy who chased us. He was wanted for trying to kidnap a boy outside of a school. Johnny and I looked at each other and seemingly telepathically agreed to never say a word. I don't know why we never spoke up, but we never did speak of it again. As I'm writing this, I'm considering reaching out to him to see if he remembers and if it all aligns with my memory of the incident. There were so many different things that happened in my childhood in the 90s that could have easily ended with me dead. Somehow I'm still here and I have my own family now. I trust no one because of incidents like that. I always have my head on a Story 6. Swivel. I used to live in a small neighborhood from the ages of 13 to 18. This took place when I was around 15. I spent most of my time just walking around the neighborhood listening to my MP3 player. Wow, I feel old just thinking about that. There was a guy around the same age as me that lived maybe 5 or so houses down from me from neighborhood Gossip I learned that he was homeschooled and had been in and out of juvie due to his anger issues. He was always outside, and sometimes when I passed his house he would start following me. I was smart enough to always have my music down low enough to be able to hear and be aware of my surroundings. At first I passed it off as him walking the same time of day I did. Looking back, I was truly dumb. As time passed, he got closer and closer to me when following, until he eventually decided to come up right behind me. He said some truly heinous things that I will not repeat here. I mean, he was right in my ear when he was talking. I ran home and told my sister. She was the one who basically raised me. She told me I was lying and to stop making up stories. For a while, I stopped going out walking until I needed the air and exercise, and tried again after maybe 2 months. Sure enough, there he was, and he came right up behind me and started to say things again. I turned my music up and ignored him. This is what I continued to do every day until he got tired of me ignoring him, I guess, because one day he grabbed my arm. I couldn't get away, and then he grabbed the back of my neck and told me that I should know better than to ignore him again. I told my sister. She didn't believe me, and I stopped going out again. 2 weeks later, I woke up to loud bangs on my bedroom wall. There was a garage on each side of the house, and my bedroom shared a wall with one of those garages. This garage was unfinished. There wasn't even concrete down, and it was easily accessible from outside as it was missing the door at the back of the house. My sister was out of town, and my dad was deaf and bedridden, so it was just me and the house able to do anything. My bedroom also had a door to go outside, so I ran over and locked it. I laid down and waited for the banging to stop, but it didn't. My cousin and her boyfriend lived down the street, so I called her, and she sent her boyfriend down to see what it was. Her boyfriend pulled right into the backyard and right up to the door into the garage. His headlights filled the garage, and out ran the guy from down the street holding a large knife. He took off running, and my cousin's boyfriend followed. It was at this time I called the police. They came and took a statement, but said there was nothing they could do because other than going into the garage and trespassing, he didn't actually do anything. I never took a walk in that neighborhood again. I still wonder how he knew what wall to bang on. How did he know I was on the other side of it? How did he know my sister was gone, or that my dad was bedridden and couldn't do anything? I never locked the door, so had he been in my house to know what would have happened if I would have gone outside? It still gives me the creeps. So guy down the street, let's not meet again. Story 7. I was taking the subway one day. A lady was walking around chugging a massive bottle of hot sauce, bloodshot eyes, tears streaming down her face. Of course, she sat next to me on the 2-seat bench. At first she was complimenting my nails, and then she just stared at me much too close for comfort. She still had tears down her face, still chugging the hot sauce. I made a comment asking if it was good or something. She acted like I was crazy for noticing it. This was at least 2 years ago, and I still can't get her face out of my mind. I hope she's doing well. This happened 6 years ago on the last. Story 8. Day of August. I just come back from spending the summer at my home and was gearing up for another year of school. My girlfriend and I drove back from the airport and were coming into the student complex where we lived, standing outside smoking. Is this man Toby? Neither of us liked Toby very much. He'd been living in the downstairs apartments last year and had been really creepy to one of our floor mates, Sarah. So creepy that he had to be banned from the upper floors, so he mostly ignored him. Toby, however, never lets a chance to socialize pass him by, so he says hello and tells us that we can't get inside. This is because the doorknob is missing. Weird, but the building was only renovated into a student complex the year before, and it was kind of trashy, so we didn't think anything of it. I put the door not back on as Toby wanders down the end of the walkway to yell obscenities down the street. That's a bit worrying because even though Toby is kind of creepy, he's not violent or overly aggressive. We slip inside. We think he must be drunk, and we settle in to go to bed since my plane got in late and it's around midnight. We tried to sleep, but it turns out it was impossible. Toby, in a rage outside, is yelling and carrying on. He comes in and out of the house, banging doors and stomping around. Now, most people moved out at the end of the year, and we're not even sure if Toby lives here anymore. We decide it's fine, he'll tire himself out, he's not hurting anyone, we just ignore it. About an hour and a half later, Toby is still at it, but now he's outside our window. We're on the side of the building that's next to the other building, and next door they're turning That building into more student complexes. Toby is banging on the chain link fence, swearing about his house. Right outside our window. At this point, both my girlfriend and I are concerned. For our safety, the yelling and the banging are incredibly violent and show absolutely no signs of anger, so we go out and lock the doors and call the police. The police take a while to arrive, but Toby is disturbing the peace, so they have a talk with him, tell him to quiet down and go to bed. They come and talk with my girlfriend, who called them, and they leave telling us to call back if things keep up or get worse. This is the end of it, we think, for about 15 minutes. Anyway, everything is quiet. Then Toby discovers we've locked the doors. He is not happy about that. He yells obscenity. Lad, with this is my house. Getting louder and louder. He goes back to beating up the chain link fence and yelling down the street at drunks coming out from the bars, but mostly he's outside our window. Then there's a brief silence, followed by the sound of shattered glass. Toby threw a rock and broke one of the windows in the room next to ours. Had he been one window over, it would have gone straight into our room. We called the police again, now very scared for our personal safety. Luckily for us, however, Toby stopped throwing rocks at windows after that. Possibly because the windows are about a story off the ground. The yelling and banging at the chain link fence and the front and back doors didn't stop, though, not until the police came and took him away. We saw him a few days later after we learned that he in fact did not live in the apartment anymore. Sitting on the grass by the driveway on the phone, he gave us the worst look when we got out of the car. Luckily, I haven't seen him since, and I'll be happy if I never run into Toby again. My brother is 2 years older, and we've probably spent tens of thousands of hours and then some in the Story 9 woods together, whether it was building forts or BMX tracks to laring and hunting. We've traveled across the U.S., exploring caves, canyons, cliff diving, mountain biking, camping, hunting white-tailed mule deer, wild boar, and whatever else since 2016. When we get the time off, I feel like adding this is important, because there's genuinely nothing I wouldn't do or fear when I have him by my side, but this time was different, and we both felt it. We've had our fair share of adventures and stories to tell of all sorts, but this one has felt like a lingering stain on my memory. We're both mid-20s, and it was 2019. This was probably my 5th time hunting the area, and the first I brought my brother along. It's a large forest area of public land that has a few country roads, which are basically 2 tracks that stretch miles throughout the area. We make the trip up in my truck with our tents, 3 in total, 1 for each of us and another to change in and keep our gear in. Without making this long-winded, we set up camp a couple of miles from the truck, which we drove for quite a few miles through the trails, basically the middle of nowhere. The nearest main road is probably 8 to 10 m away. We arrived late in the night, set up camp, and quickly fell asleep after a long trip. We spent the next day scouting and tracking, then made back to camp for the night. We cooked, then ate, had some beers, and the night was still early, but we had a long day and decided to head off for the night. Everything up until this point was normal. I suddenly awoke to something smacking my tent and hearing my brother's voice call my name. I knew something was off. I called back to him, and he immediately unzipped my tent and made his way inside. I could tell that he was disturbed when I went to ask him what's wrong, and he immediately grabbed my shoulder and told me to shush. The sun wasn't up yet, so I think it was around 4:30 a.m. We sat in my tent, and what we heard still confuses me to this day. I can only explain it as whale sounds, different tones of extremely loud noise that I could feel throughout my body. It would come and go, but there would only be a few seconds of silence in between the sounds. It would vary from high-pitched squeals and everything in between to very low sounds that had literal ground shaking reverb. I regrettably didn't think to grab my phone or record anything that was going on, because what I was hearing didn't seem real, and in the moment I was struck, the sound went on until daylight started to break. I believe it was about an hour, but I'm not really sure. Neither of us spoke, and at the time I felt like I could feel the energy around me, almost like my body was covered in white noise, if that makes any sense. It wasn't even minutes after the sound stopped, it started to rain, and one of the craziest thunderstorms while I was camping happened. The forecast didn't predict or account for any rain the days we were going to be there. Prior to making the trap, all the stakes for the tent or gear was in completely ripped out of the ground, and both of our tents had multiple stakes ripped out as well. Those things we drove into the ground with an axe, and would take some insane force to unearth every single one. My Brother dismisses it and won't even talk about it, saying it was just machinery being dragged, but at the time we both share the same feeling of fear and dread. It just seems odd. In was still the middle of the night, and we were so far removed from any nearby communities or industry to hear and experience this music. Occurrence almost a year ago. I was an opener at a resort, clocking in before 5 a.m. each day. The resort is located. Story 10. Inside an affluent neighborhood in a very wealthy town. Our employees had to park in one of two parking lots at either end of the property, and the lot I chose was adjacent to a long and windy road. Outside the resort, which led to the rest of the neighborhood, the road and resort were separated by a short range of brush and trees that no one ever walked through. I'd arrive one morning per usual and put the car into park with my headlights still on. The lights in the lot weren't ever on in the morning, since no one else really showed up before 6 a.m. when the sun was out, so it was usually always dark at the start of my walk. Save for security, I was one of the first employees to arrive on the property each morning and was usually completely alone in this particular parking lot at this time. This morning didn't seem any different. I had my hand literally at my keys, my brain in the process to turn off my car, when I noticed a young girl, maybe like 14 or 15 years old, come scampering through the span of the trees that separates the resort from the outside road. She was directly in front of my car, and my headlights illuminated a clear view of her in the pitch black. She looked like she was in high school, had long blonde hair, and was wearing a jacket with pajamas. Maybe it was like she just walked out of a house. One thing about her that bothered me was that she wouldn't stop laughing and smiling. I couldn't hear her laughing from outside the car, but she was visually giggling at something I wasn't aware of or could see. And it was so unnatural. She occasionally glanced behind her as if someone else were waiting there away from the headlights. She then waved at me like it were a normal gesture at this time, and then immediately ran to my passenger side door. This all happened in a matter of seconds, and I wasn't really sure what was even happening. Besides my anxiety spiking, I simultaneously yanked the aux from my phone to shut whatever song I'd been playing off while grabbing for the lock button. I remember feeling panic for never remembering if it's up or down to lock when the girl began pulling violently and incessantly on the door handle on the passenger side. I realized because I didn't turn my car off it had stayed locked. She began pounding on the window, and I was screaming on the top of my lungs for her to leave before pressing on my horn. I could see her laughing outside like this was some type of game, as if I were a silly friend for not letting her in as a joke. After a few seconds she stopped pounding and trying to open my car door. Her face fell flat like I disappointed her, and she started to walk away from my car back the way she came. She waved at me again before squeezing through the trees out of the view of my headlights. This whole encounter confused me almost as much as it scared me. Most people I told the story to just chalked it up to her being on drugs, but that narrative hasn't felt right to me. Despite her behavior, maybe she was just being an extremely out of touch teenager whose parents need a firmer grip on her. My first thought was possibly human trafficking, but I'm not sure if that would fit the scenario, as I'm not the most well versed with the subject. I told someone when I made it to LP, but they didn't seem to care much. I didn't call the police, and I regret that. I'll never get out of my brain, though, how off the feeling was watching a stranger seemingly alone pop out from the trees in the darkness, laughing and then trying to violently enter your car in an empty parking lot. I do think the possibility of someone else being present the whole time is a lot more scary, and I wonder who else was there and where. Story 11. Exactly. I've been working for an independent hotel for just over 4 years now. We're the #1 rated hotel in our city and proud of it. I mostly work in housekeeping, but have done some time at the front desk as well. I love my job up and have always said that my bosses are great. Now, being a housekeeper, I've seen some things. I've seen a room where someone snuck in their dog, kitten, and chicken. We don't allow pets. I even had a room once that we had to call the cops on for a raid because we found meth. They found a lot of drugs and guns in that room, but today is the first time I've ever actually felt scared to be in a guest's room, as I'm working on a room that's already been vacated. A man in the next room over catches me at my supply cart. He's set to be staying for several days and tells me, "You can go ahead and clean my room now. I'm going down for breakfast." Excellent. I love getting my stayovers done early on. It makes things easier for the people working laundry. The sooner we get the dirty laundry down to them, so I pop over into his room. opening it up and propping the door open with a stopper like we always do. The first thing I notice is that he has around 20 prescription bottles lined up on one of the two beds along with insulin and needles. I'm nosy, I'll admit it, and I wanted to see what he was on. Oddly, it was only 2 different types of medication for all 20 bottles. About 2 of 3 were a diabetes medication, and the rest were a chest all medication. That's a little weird that he has so many bottles of the same medication, but whatever. I go to make the bed and see that some of the bedding has been stained. I sigh, knowing that I'll have to change all the bedding now instead of just being able to turn down the sheets and blanket, so I leave the room, closing the door behind me to get the linens I need, and then I head right back to the room. I propped the door open again and had to set the clean linens on the desk chair when I see out of the corner of my eye 2 notes sitting on the TV armoire. It wouldn't mean anything except I caught the word kill scrolled on it. I dropped the linens and took a closer look. What I read on the first note made my blood run cold. It said, "You don't have to forgive her, you just can't kill her. You were here to take money and alcohol away from you. Get over having to kill her and you can safely leave." My heart was pounding, my eyes went to the second note, which it just looked like a to-do list at first, but in the end it made my stomach churn. The list said spray and wash, apply for Medicare in subordination. The soul is healed by being with children. Bank card follow-up. Inheritance savings co-pop 10,500 map Montana. There will be a day of reckoning. Did you tell mom what I said? How did Beth get my address? It was too much. I quickly snapped pictures of them on my phone so I could show my boss why I would not clean his room. I left the room quickly, closing it up behind me. As the door closes, I turn and I see the man just 10 ft away from me coming back to his room. My heart is in my throat, but I manage a smile and I tell him I need more supplies. I'll be back to your room in a bit. I take off straight for the elevator, having noticed our maintenance man waiting for the slow transport. In a hushed tone, I tell him what I found, and he sees that I'm shaken and that it's not a normal state for me. He writes down with me, and I go straight to my boss and tell her that for the first time in all these years I am not comfortable being in a guest's room. I showed her the picture and her face is still and pale. She goes to the front desk and asks our general manager for a minute of her time, and then brings her into the office to show her. She agreed this was not a safe situation and took our maintenance man with her to go inform the man that he had 1 hour to gather his belongings and leave the hotel, and that he was not welcome back. I spent a few minutes in the laundry room trying to calm down. Then my boss went back up with me to the floor until the man was officially out of our hotel. I don't know who Beth is. I don't know who the woman is that he didn't feel he needed to forgive, but man in room 422, let's never meet again. If you have a scary story you would like me to read in an upcoming video, this is one way to help me guarantee variety in the stories I share. You can email me or post it to my subreddit. I'll drop the details in the video description. Thank you all for listening, and a special thanks to my patrons and channel members who now have early access to ad-free videos as well as other behind-the-scenes content. Thank you to Dixie Busby, Michelle Green, Misty Rur, Michelle Brooks, Lavina Cordelia, Kirby Harris, Angie Lindop, Rebecca James, Mason Hayes, Chelsea Muffet, Lisa Apprentice, Michelle and Kevin, Amanda M, Rebecca Morris, Yennefer, Jessica Lasley, Brock Ballard, Kim Thompson, Angela Reeves, Sher, AGI, Nathan Shadwick, Nicholas Johnson, Samantha PL, Cheryl Duckworth, Scoutum 405Z Harris, Unladylike 13, Ventura, California, Elizabeth Mayers, Alexia Tuttle, Marshall Rainey, Willow Sapon, Mary Wright, Jessica Copperfield, Zoe D, Daniel Shaw, Jane Wiggins, Tara Harris, Mary W, Callie Townsend M, Deshawn Edmondson, Kimmy L, Wendy Maris, Confessions of a Cleaner, Megan Abrams, Miss Tycoon, Stephen Sloan, Christina Myway, Ashley Bray, Mattis, Afelter, Danielle, Tina Marie Heckman, Amal Garner, Lisa Redford, Deborah Malakani, Sue T, Adwell, Diana Johnston, Vampy Debs, Jasmine Davis, Erica Air, Fox Mulder, Ram Beltron, Tina, Nick Bosie, Sarah C.H. Neal, Kavanaugh, Tiara Sanders, Timothy Stratton, Jennifer Jenkins, Lloyd Rash, Maribel Duna, Michael O'Malley, Marissa Kuro, Amber Hops, King Slim, Justin Beast, Gillespie, Joy, Dan J, Blee, Anna, Stephanie McLaren, Lumini, Kami Skin Crawler, Adara Bella, Place 2006, Michelle Welchman, Dana B, Lisa McDonald, Clary Scott, Madison C, Wasp Sting, Jennifer J, Ashley Liliat, Lee T. Wyatt, Gina Laura JK 6 Venzio Donna Joey Big GSC. Tanya Spaghetti Wolo King Matthew October Gypsy Lisa Ollie. Thomas Build With Me Letitia Fran Debs. Insomnic Cats Stephanie Summer Rebecca. Tyara This Bad Kitty Your Paypiece Dilly Laney Tripping Balls Through History. Samantha Erica Alyssa Tracy Killians. Place April James Arbor Jen Joy. Handout Pegasus Genesis Karen Kitty V. Barry LJ Fiona Xbox Scott I Like Booty Monica. Level A Chris and Anna Holly Spry Kimber. Jasmine Sentix Heather Haven Kitty Cat Luna 2 ADHD Aurora. Janice Cinderella Baby Borderline Betty Lady Draco Erica Nicole Snowball Rena. Melanie the Honeybee 987 Pretty Girl 215 Ryan Brook Wendy CFTY Kel Tina Dina. Vampy Debs Patricia Amber Krista Brenda. Absent Alice Chrissy K Spiders Web H Law. La Andrea Sue Monique Shaw Gorman Emma. Lisa Sigma Cube X Greg Chelsea Amanda. Jane Sam Zepte Sarah C Austin Tan Lil. Smart Jenny Gabrielle Fire Over by Sarah. P James Gargan Gemma Allen Monica Level A and Alex. I hope you're doing well, guys. I'll see you all on the next one.